everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Thursday morning, and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm Eric here with AJ in Austin, Texas. Today is February 1st, 2018, and this is episode number 204. How's it going, man?
Man, it's going well. So what we're talking about earlier, this episode is kind of interesting where our news and updates was kind of put on a platter to us as far as being categorized, where in the past we'd try to break it down into earning miles, using miles, promotions, and the news was always, disproportionate to
the news
to
doesn't usually behave.
No, we can't dictate it, but today we've got kind of a few neat categories from buying miles to hotel stuff to availability to Africa.
So I'm excited. Some things that I've been looking forward to talking about, and we've got a couple of listener questions. We're going to kind of weave core content into the news. There's a few things that come up with the news stories that I think are worth expanding on. So we've got some tips for you guys. No big core content stuff this week, but we'll definitely have more coming up in future episodes. But let's get right into the news here. Let's start out with the new announcements about the transferable points that you can now buy.
Yeah, this is interesting, and this is good news. So what we're going to start with is American Express membership reward. So you can now buy Amex points, essentially if you have a card that earns Amex points. That's kind of, I believe that's how it works. And as far as the price goes, it's going to be 2.5 cents per point. So if you compare this to buy miles promotions across some of the other airlines, maybe you've seen stuff with AA in the past because they heavily promote that. This on the surface may seem expensive, but this can serve to be a very good deal when you consider the transfer partners and some of the opportunities you have. A few bullet points about buying Amex membership rewards points is, as they say, you can only buy points when you're in the process of using points for a reward and don't have enough. So my imagination tells me the way I interpret that is if you want to book a reward and you've got the miles for that reward, you can't buy the miles. But that wouldn't really make sense that you'd want to buy the miles if you have the points for the reward.
Yeah, there's not a ton of information in this, so we're going to have to follow up. I know that there's actually a couple of bookings that we're working on right now that this would come in super handy. This is brand new information. This is potentially something that's been around for some time. It doesn't explicitly say, at least in the release that we were looking at, that it's a new feature. But I've seen this, I've never seen this before. I think where this is really attractive to me is the lower level purchases of miles, where a lot of times you may be able to get 2 cents per point in terms of the price if you buy $3,000 worth of miles.
Yeah, exactly.
But this doesn't have any sort of tiered structure, and it's also a permanent mileage sale. At least, obviously, nothing is permanent with this, but for the time being, you can buy Amex points, and 1,000 of them cost $25.
$25, yeah. Without going too deep on this, we got this from Frequent Miler, which is a solid blog. And man, the only person to comment on this blog post was thinking exactly what I was thinking. Dan from the comment section of Frequent Miler says, "This is great and super timely for me. Looking at ANA awards now." That's the first thing I thought of.
I was just looking at trying to buy
flight for under 100,000 Amex points.
Yep. Yeah. I was looking at, can you buy ANA miles like last week for a booking client, and you can't, or at least maybe if you read Japanese, there's a way to figure it out, but they're not advertising it in an obvious way. There's no minimum. Well, the minimum's 1,000, so increments of 1,000, but this could be really useful to top up Amex. Definitely don't go run out and buy a bunch of Amex points. This is something that you're going to use in a targeted way to just top up accounts to make sure you have enough to redeem, or it could be a really good value for certain business and first class redemptions where it's just a lot cheaper than buying a $3,000 or $4,000 business or first class ticket. The other thing that's in the post that I thought was interesting is that it looks like you've got a 500,000 point limit per calendar year, and it's tied to which cards you have. But most of the mainstream cards, like the Amex Everyday, the Premier Rewards Gold, those all seem to have the 500K limit versus the 100K limit.
Right.
Where I can see that coming into play, where maybe you're looking at travel for 2 and you need to buy 120,000 miles or 150,000 miles. So this is good news. The other story that we have about this is on Citibank.
Yeah.
And so essentially the same story. Again, I don't know if this is something that's completely brand new or if it's just something that has been around and has been not well reported on, but also the first time we've talked about Citi points being purchasable. Same price point here, same minimum of 1,000. This one, it looks like explicitly you have to call to purchase the points. So you can call the Citi Thank You Service Center. The one thing that jumps out to me that I think is kind of crappy about this is that they make purchase points expire 1 year from the date you buy them.
And there's a little bit of a different limit here where it's 100K per year, per calendar year.
Okay. And it seems like that's per account holder. So there may be a workaround there where you can transfer Citi points to other people. So if you need to buy more than 100,000, I could buy 100,000 with mine. You could buy 100,000, and then we could share. But I guess bottom line here is that same price, and there's certainly some different transfer partners that are accessible with Citi. In particular, for me, this is probably not going to be super useful for a ton of people, but I love Etihad miles because of their award chart with Gol in Brazil.
Yeah,
they've got great prices for distance-based travel. Virgin Atlantic is a partner of both, but we've been using that a lot recently. They've got a ton of really good availability. Avianca Life Miles is also a program. We've talked about that. I want to say that was about 4 or 5 episodes ago that we talked about new transfer partners for Citi and for Chase. We'll link to that in the show notes as well, because we did talk about the new transfer partners, especially Avianca. So there's some tips about how to use those, but definitely a couple of programs that don't overlap with American Express and ways to purchase new miles at a reasonable rate, especially if you don't need to purchase a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. This is good news. Moving on into kind of our hotel section, we've got a couple hotel stories. This is interesting. So Capital One, not a hotel or really affiliated directly with a hotel, but Capital One is a credit card issuer that we really don't talk about much because their program is so straightforward. There's rarely arbitrage. They call their points miles when they're not miles. They're kind of annoying. However, they've got an interesting promotion now through January 2020. So if you have the Capital One Venture Rewards card or the Capital One Venture One Rewards card, they're going to give you 10x miles when you book through hotels.com/venture. So they've got like a special link you use. So this is pretty interesting because that is essentially, 10% cash back effectively on hotel purchases through hotels.com. And another interesting thing here is if anyone's a hotels.com loyalist, they've essentially got, if you stay enough, you get your 10% back every 10 hotels. So if you buy 10, get one free, and that works out as whatever the average of the prices was across those 10 bookings, you get that towards a night somewhere. So this is pretty interesting. I actually spot checked the pricing on hotels.com/venture with just a basic search for Barcelona this summer because I'm always suspicious of these. The same things with shopping portals. I'm always suspicious.
Good investigative journalism.
What I found so far was that the prices are pretty fair, and I used Kayak to kind of cross-reference amongst Orbit, Priceline, Agoda, and the hotels.com prices were pretty fair. So if you've got one of these cards, definitely something to consider. And yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes to hotels.com/venture.
Yeah, I think to me, this is like the bottom line for me is there's a lot of places where a chain hotel is not really in play for me. Like I can think of a lot of trips that I've taken to places in Brazil, places in Colombia, where there's just not a major chain hotel that's convenient or that you want. And at least like the one I've used in the past is Booking.com. I'm not especially, I don't feel any attachment to Booking.com. The reviews are kind of like what, I more or less trust that I can get a judge for it. So I'm curious to see if Hotels.com could be a substitute for Booking.com, getting that 10% back, I would definitely, I've got the Venture card, so this would be an easy switch to get some extra points there.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see how this plays out. And through 2020, that's a big commitment. You know what I mean? That's
rare.
That's unusual.
I'm sure, they have in the terms and conditions that we can say, just kidding, anytime we want.
Yeah, but I mean, that's calculated. They're pretty confident if they're going to go ahead and say it.
I agree 100%. All right, so next up is one that I was really excited. This was my favorite story to read this week. This has been sort of pitched on both sides as either a devaluation or an improvement. My opinion personally is that this is a massive improvement, and this is with regard to IHG's new Point Breaks promotion. So for those of you who've been following, we've reported on this most months when Point Breaks list is released. IHG Hotel Brands offers a subset of their global portfolio at 5,000 points per night, and they pick a set of properties that they're going to offer for that 5,000 point rate. There's a limited number of rooms that are at that discounted rate, and after they're sold out, they're out. And essentially this, kind of used to be a tremendous promotion that people looked forward to and had lots of great hotels. And then slowly over time, the quality of the hotels just started going down and down and down. And so what they've changed is that the new points break, it used to be all of the hotels that were all eligible at 5,000 points a night. And what they've done now is they've added a 10,000 point tier and a 15,000 point tier. And looking through the list, it's immediately obvious that there's way more quality hotels that I'd be interested in. So I was looking at, especially the worldwide ones, I recognized real cities that I would want to go to. I recognized places that were interesting. I don't know if volume-wise there's a ton more, but just hotels in spots that I would be super interested in.
By the way, I'd be curious to break down the cents per point. My imagination tells me that going from the 5K a night to 10K a night, something tells me that those hotels be more like 3 times the amount of money to buy.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing is the original program, maybe it started out differently, but at some point you would never find an Intercontinental on the list because those are way too expensive of hotels to offer for 5,000 points a night. And there's multiple Intercontinentals this time around that are on either the 10 or the 15K list, and those hotels go for 60K a night. So it's still a huge savings.
I don't really understand the people that are crying foul about this, where I think there's two components. There's price and then there's availability.
Right.
We just got a big shot in the arm for availability that we did not previously have. So you can't really complain about the price of new options. You know what I mean? Hey, there's options now. You don't have to book the damn thing. It's nice that we have better options. We should, I don't know. I think it's a good thing.
So yeah, this seems to be the new setup for the IHG points break promo. So we'll see if they continue to have a high quality list. We'll have a link in the show notes that's got the list broken down by the 5K, the 10K, and the 15K properties. And if you do see one that you like, definitely act quickly because these are the types of the good ones go fast. And take a look at the terms. I believe for sure they have a very good refund policy on points redemptions, where I think it's 48 hours before you check in that you can get the points back. If you end up buying points, one of the things you can do is, let's say you have 10,000 points and you need 15, you can buy those extra 5 for cash. But the one thing to be aware of if you think you might need to refund it is they actually refund those points that you bought back as points rather than as cash. So if you had 10K points, you paid however many dollars to get the extra 5K, you're going to refund the room and get 15K back rather than your cash as well. But this is the kind of thing you can do some speculative bookings and grab rooms that you think you might need, and at the worst have some points left over to use next time.
Yeah. So this next section here is something we're talking about before the show. It was something we ran into last week, and it kind of dawned on us. So this is award availability. So there's been recently, or as of the last day or two, there's some of the more popular blogs had some blog posts about this great availability. We go to spot check it before we tell all of you guys to go out there and jump on these great deals. And really the availability is kind of gone.
Yeah, decimated. I would say, if you follow the blogs every day, there's definitely time to take action where, there's a period of hours or maybe even days in some of these cases.
It's difficult for us on a weekly interval to stay
we're a long ways off from being able to do a daily podcast. We're going to need some serious support staff, but that's the kind of attention that you have to pay to be able to take advantage. And so this inspired us to talk a little bit about what you can do independently to monitor for award availability. And so that's kind of mini core content number one for today, is to talk about a couple of different strategies. So real quick, I want to recap the availability that was announced this week on high traffic blogs that for the most part's gone. US to Europe on American Airlines. This is actually not really a new thing. American has opened up a lot of award space that up until a month ago was pretty uncommon to see as many seats. So they've done a good job with their own flights. There are definitely still some that are available. I think space is pretty decent over the summer, especially if you're willing to have a couple of connections positioned to other airports in the US. So the more flexible you are, the better. But there's definitely business class that's available to Europe this summer in particular, which I remember last summer when we were doing bookings, even by January, February, it was already getting really tough. So that's good news. The other two, there's a Qantas to San Francisco to Melbourne route, and a Brisbane to Los Angeles route, which continues on to New York. And both of those had some availability. Australia is notoriously difficult, especially if you don't route via Asia. So if you go straight from the US to Australia, business class is tricky. Economy is pretty wide open on that, but most people want business class for that long flight. And I think I found on the San Francisco Melbourne route, I think I found one seat. And the screenshots in the blog post were all this wide open space.
And what do you think it is about the business class availability? I mean, is it as simple as market A versus market B? So like LA to Sydney, let's say, for example, like those are really affluent places with some demand and enough business going on that there's people that just buy those so they don't have to open them up, or what?
Maybe, but
because it's not
London to JFK has award availability, and that's a market that supports buying business class.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of volume there, but still,
there's more capacity, I think, is part of it. Think about it this way. Los Angeles doesn't have three major airports like New York does.
Right.
London and New York both have three major, big airports. Sydney doesn't have multiple airports that support any long-haul international. So I think maybe that's part of it. The other thing is that the market really for long-haul travel to the U.S. is dominated by American, a little bit by, United's got a couple of routes. Qantas has got a few routes, but it seems like there's less frequencies for sure. And, there's only a couple of cities where, if you're looking to travel to Europe, there's so many touch points on the East Coast or on the West Coast that you can fly across.
Yeah, I think we also forget how small as far as population goes Australia is.
Yeah.
It's a country of 20-some million people. And I started trying to do the math, and think of all the flights to Europe. It's like, Europe population is similar to the United States, North America-ish.
Yeah, a little bit more.
But yeah, I don't know.
So, all right. So to kind of back up here and talk about this got me thinking about what you can do if you're not paying attention to the blogs on a daily basis, and you've got aspirations to go to Australia. And so the two things I wanted to talk about are if you've got really flexible dates, what you can do to do this super fast and free and just see what's out there and be able to catch when something pops up. And then the opposite side of the spectrum where you've got maybe 3 or 4 really specific dates, and those are the only ones, but you really want to know if those become available. So strategy number 1, American Airlines has a really nice calendar search. And this really works best for flights to Australia because American shows availability for Qantas and their own flights. Those are really the only 2 partners that are going to be there. So you're not missing things like you would be with, with flights to Europe where you're only going to see American and British Airways, and you're missing Iberia, you're missing Finnair, you're missing. So you can search for these routes and just kind of flip through the calendar. on American, and you can see 1 month at a time. So if you're looking for flights anytime in the next 4 or 5 months, you can see every single date in business class with little effort, just a few clicks. And so that's something that you can check, once every few days, once a week, and have a really good chance of picking out that business class seat without somebody posting a blog post about a ton of availability. The second thing is that for other one world availability that's not US to Australia, I think Qantas's website is actually a really good tool, because Qantas shows Japan Airlines, Qantas shows Cathay Pacific, so they show some good partners for Asia. I don't think they show Finnair, but they do show Iberia flights. So Qantas, I don't have the list memorized.
Does it have a calendar view?
More, and they've got the calendar view.
Because that's like the knockout punch of British
and the
Airways.
even better version, the British. That's the difference right there.
Yeah.
Like most of the overlap in terms of partners that are displayed, but Qantas has not only the full calendar, but it also shows you can check boxes to say, I want to see business class, premium economy, and first class.
Yeah.
And it's got these little icons that tell you which days have which ones.
Similar to United.
Yeah, exactly. Where you got the dots and the line. Qantas is actually my favorite interface as far as like if you're looking at a graphical interface that actually helps the user. It's better because even with American, you still have to say, okay, I want to look at the next 3 months and I want to see what's available in business. You got to look at those 3 months in business, and then you got to go back and look at them again in first. It changes. You have to click a toggle and look at them twice, whereas the Qantas shows you everything. So for those with flexible dates, that's the tip, is to use Qantas's website to search month by month and just see the whole calendar all at once, and take advantage of American's website for especially for US to Australia, because that can be a pretty easy way to see those flights. American's also lets you sort for nonstop. And so if you're looking for flights from a hub like JFK or San Francisco to someplace specific like Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, you can see if that particular flight is open in a full calendar view as well by toggling that nonstop. On to the other side are road warriors that work all the time and get a little bit of vacation and are looking forward to booking a flight that's a little bit
maybe you had to give your boss advance notice and you got your holiday and you don't know what you're going to do with it, but you put the stake in the ground and there it is.
Yep. So if you've got a couple of specific days, unfortunately, this one requires a little bit more time to set up, but unlike the calendar one where you got to check regularly to see if anything's opened up, if you use Expert Flyer, which does have a monthly fee, so for alerts, you got to be ready to pay $10 a month to be able to have access to the Expert Flyer. It can be really worthwhile to monitor.
I mean, if you're talking about an aspirational business class flight, like get out of here if you think that's too much money. Who do you think you are?
So you've got the option to set up alerts for specific flight segments using Expert Flyer. You just go find the flight you want. You say how many seats that you're looking for. So if it's you and your spouse, you choose 2 seats, and you'll get an email as soon as 2 or more seats show up in the award inventory. So that's a really good way to just know that you're going to get notified immediately. And, I think really the only other people that are going to get that are other folks that set the exact same alert on the exact same day as you.
Right. One thing to note with that, though, is there's a little bit of a booby trap. Let's say you're in beautiful Austin, Texas. If you plug in Austin to Sydney, you're never going to see anything, right? Because there's no flights there.
Well, so the way that it actually is pretty good about showing you how to get from Austin to Sydney, but so it'll say Austin, LA.
But as
LA,
far as the
Sydney,
alerts go, that's
but you got to set both alerts. Yeah. So, but if you search, like you definitely start by searching from where you want to go to the destination, and it'll show you, okay, you've got one option that goes Austin, San Fran to Sydney, and one that goes Austin, LA to Sydney. And then so once you see that in the display, you just got to click in and set an alert for, generally you're going to want to focus on setting those alerts for the overseas, the long haul segments.
Right.
Anyways, would love to hear any questions, especially success stories about how that goes. We do get some emails occasionally about folks that have found availability, using methods like that. So, and any tricks you guys have, would be interested to share. However, that's pretty much it for that. It's just a matter of putting in a little bit of time to either check something as far as looking at the calendar on a regular basis, or set some alerts and get some emails. Or you could just have us do it, and we're happy to check them every day for you.
Yeah, just go to abroaders.com, check out the services tab, and then the flight booking service. Moving on to, you know what, we're gonna talk about a country that, I'm just kidding, it's continent, Africa. So we're going to talk about some new flights between the U.S. and Africa, in particular Ethiopia and Kenya. And for some of the people listening, you may wonder, well, why are you guys talking about these new flights? And I guess when we see new flights, what we think of as new opportunities, new options, potential redemptions, and different ways to get to interesting places of the world. And Africa, very much in the same league as Australia, as far as like, it's a difficult place to get to. It's difficult to redeem. There's all sorts of crazy routings, and some of the airline programs routing rules don't even let you to like honestly book a flight how they actually route the flight. So we've got three new routes that are going to Africa that are pretty cool. The first one is with Kenya Airways. They're going to be flying a 787 between Nairobi and JFK. And that's going to be a daily flight. So that's pretty cool too. I mean, when you think about folks making the trek to make the trek that is Kilimanjaro or do a safari, like Kenya's a pretty nice place to do those, to do, you know, the safari thing. And then, like I said, you've got Kilimanjaro. So that's pretty cool that there's a direct flight from JFK to Nairobi, where generally speaking, your routing's going to be kind of crazy.
Generally speaking, I mean, if you already live in New York, you're already cutting a couple of stops off of most itineraries. But, you know, if you're going from someplace else in the U.S., getting to Nairobi could be 3 stops, you know, before this route came out.
Yeah, you may stop in Europe, then the Middle East, and then go over the Middle East and then somewhere else. And then, so we got 2 more.
Yeah, well, before we move on, so Kenya Airways is a partner of SkyTeam Alliance, and so I'm pretty sure you can look up award availability with those guys on Delta's website. And so that's probably the best way to search for Kenya Airways award availability. Expert Flyer also has Kenya, so if you created that account to set the alerts, as we were talking about a minute ago, you can also look up flights. It can be a little bit faster. Sometimes Delta shoves their results a little bit higher on the list, but Delta's only got, I think, 1 flight to Africa anyway, so you should be able to get...
Just leaning on the partners.
Yep.
Well, moving to another alliance, which would be the Star Alliance, right?
Yep.
Ethiopian. They've got a flight between Newark, which makes sense, like we're talking before. You've got United there, Star Alliance partner. And this is heading to, man, I was practicing how to say this before the show, Addis Ababa.
That's brilliant.
Via Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. And this is pretty interesting. There's a reason why there's this connection when it could kind of halfway be a one-way flight. So what we've got is Newark to Addis Ababa via the Ivory Coast, essentially. And the reason they connect in the Ivory Coast is when you're flying west. So the airport in Addis Ababa is at elevation, and so that poses some problems on you don't have enough fuel based on taking off at such a high elevation to get all the way to Newark. So they route through the Ivory Coast, where the eastbound flight from Newark could hypothetically go straight there, but they've got rights in the Ivory Coast, and they figure they can serve another market and do that. So
in other words, because of long-haul fuel requirements, they can fly from New York because they're going with the wind, and they're taking off without elevation. Mm-hmm. So the flight from Newark, do you know how long the flight's blocked at? Is it like 16 hours, something like that?
It's long. I mean, I think around there 15-ish.
Okay, so you can make it the one way, but you basically can't get off the runway in Ethiopia with enough fuel to get to New York going the other direction. And so you got to stop. Super interesting. So another stop in West Africa.
And we've got one more route. And this one is interesting because
this is the Dublin stop.
Yeah, one of the segments is direct and one of them is not. So the same thing with Ethiopian, Star Alliance partner from Chicago O'Hare. So we've got a flight straight from Chicago into Addis Ababa. So that is a long flight as well. And then on your way back, you're going to stop in Dublin to get some fuel do the good old Irish fueling, and then head to Chicago. And that's the same idea where flying west, they just don't have the fuel to do whatever is necessary to do it in a safe manner. But so pretty cool. So to recap the Africa availability and new routes, we've got a SkyTeam option between New York and Kenya, a direct flight JFK and Nairobi, and we've got a couple options with Ethiopian that also serves as kind of an direct flight to the Ivory Coast, where that's meant to be just a little refueling stop. So we've got Chicago and Newark now. We'll have some flights that will go to Ethiopia and stop on the west coast of Africa and the Ivory Coast on the way there and on the way back.
Interesting. All right. Well, definitely useful. We were talking about, we definitely don't have time to get into it in detail today, but we had mentioned before we started recording doing a little bit of a talk about the United Mileage Plus Explorer, what the hell is Excursionist Award. And so this is basically what replaced United's, or originally they had the most amazing stopover rules where you could basically book a round the world flight for one low price. They devalued that a little bit about a year and a half ago, but some new information has come out about creative ways to do the Explorer, the Excursionist Award. God, that's I keep thinking Exhibitionist Award, which let's not go there. But at any rate, these flights on Ethiopian made me think of that because there's you've also got South African, which is part of Star Alliance, and so essentially the teaser for a future much more comprehensive core content on this kind of loophole in the award chart is that you get a free one-way flight within the region that you're traveling in, and if you're creative, you can use it along with a couple of additional paid flights or positioning flights to visit 4, 5, 6 different destinations on a trip. So we'll get into that. The basic version, though, would be that on this particular itinerary, you could do the Newark to Ivory Coast, have a nice stop there, and then get a free flight from Ivory Coast to Addis Ababa, go do some Kilimanjaro, go hang out and do some other stuff, and then potentially fly back open jaw from South Africa and return to the U.S. that way. So there's some really cool opportunities. It's great to see new routes that include Africa, because that opens up new things here.
Is there any way we could connect that? So does that work on a one-way award? You with the Excursionist, do you get to do...
You can make it work with 2 open jaw. It's got to be a round trip itinerary overall.
What I was thinking is, with what we talked about last week, the Curly Shuffle with Cathay Pacific via Alaska, where you go from New York to Hong Kong to Cape Town.
Yep.
And I was just trying to think if so now you got to that region, and is there any way South African would fly to Nairobi, and then you could pile on another one? I guess you could put together a one-way and a round trip for some hell of an excursion, but
yeah. Well, I was actually today, I had a consult call where I was talking with somebody about the Singapore round the world ticket, where they've got, I think it's 240,000 miles per person to book a round the world ticket in business class. Can you include like 7, 8 stops? So it could potentially be a really good value, but this particular customer was asking me could I actually save miles if I just did like a couple of flights, a couple of different awards combined together? Yeah. And I got to thinking about it. I didn't have a good answer at the time, but if you consider using Alaska with a stopover and then connecting it with some sort of round trip excursionist, there's definitely ways you can build your own round the world award for fewer miles or with better quality than you could with the Singapore.
Man, the Singapore thing, that's really attractive because of their transfer opportunities.
Yes.
Like it's attainable to rack up 240K with Singapore when you consider they take points from everybody.
Yep. Chase, Amex, Starwood Preferred Guest, and Citi.
Citi, yeah.
So
the big 4.
It's easy to earn. All right. So before we wrap it up, I think that covers our news for today. I wanted to get to a listener success story shared by David, and then we had one question from Recon.
Recon Scott, yeah. Do you want to start with David's story, or do you want to start with Recon Scott?
Well, yeah. Let's start with the question. Let's do Recon's question. So this was actually in relation to some stuff we talked about last week with
premium cards. Yeah. Okay. So getting to Recon Scott's question, he says, in your last episode, you mentioned that changes to AA Ward travel was free as long as the starting and the ending locations did not change. And his question is there any way you could potentially hack availability by finding some hypothetically saver business class? And then he wants to know if we could potentially try to move the dates around to backdoor into some availability.
Okay, yeah. So I guess to start, the initial concept is that with American, if you want to change your dates, but you keep the same origin and destination, that's no problem. Mm-hmm. The caveat to that is that you have to find award availability on the other date. So I think what his initial question was getting at, is there a way to take a saver award on the 5th of the month, mm-hmm. and then there's no availability on the 7th, which is what you really want, and you just kind of work your way into a saver award on the 7th.
A little backdoor. Because you already got the price, and
even exchange, it's fine. So unfortunately, that doesn't work. You need to find a seat that still has the saver level. I've also tried getting around American's close-in booking fee. Very limited data set on this. I did get charged or told that I would be charged to move the booking date inside. The agent got me on it. I would be surprised, though, if you can get away with it, in the similar way to United with some agents that don't charge it.
Whoever you were booking on behalf of, do you know if they had status with American Airlines?
I'd be curious. I think status doesn't have to pay the close-in booking fee, or it's reduced.
But I was even wondering tiers, where I'm wondering if there's a little bit of grace they give you if you're the low-level status and you don't get the perk, but they say, what the hell, this seems fair game.
So one last thing about the American free change rule. I learned a couple of new things today because I was looking at all kinds of different options for some flights that were ideally going from Delhi, India to Hong Kong, and then we're connecting over to the US. And apparently you're not supposed to be able to make that free change if you go from a non-One World Alliance airline to a One World Alliance airline. So the only real place that this would likely come up is if you originally were on Alaska or Etihad and you were trying to change to a flight operated by Cathay Pacific or something like that. For the most part, their routes don't even overlap a ton. Mm-hmm. But in this particular case, it became a problem because the original itinerary was booked Delhi to the U.S. on Etihad, and then I was trying to go the opposite direction around the world, going Delhi to the U.S. via Hong Kong on Cathay. So that's, I guess, one last thing to watch out for. But Scott, thanks for the question, and thanks for trying to think outside the box and
definitely
work some magic. All right, and so last but not least, wanted to share a listener success story. So we've talked a bit about reconsideration. We're certainly due for another episode about getting approved for rewards cards and some of the things that you can do to improve your chances. I think the bottom line about this concept is that a lot of people are somewhat anxious or apprehensive about having to call and talk to people. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more personal seeming than just filling out an application on the website. But over and over and over again, the reports that we hear back are overwhelmingly successful. When you call reconsideration, the banks put somebody on the phone whose job is to see if you can be approved for the card. And I'd say 75 or 80%.
That's a key point. They don't send you a form to fill out. There's a human involved.
Yep, a real person, and truly, from the percentage of people that get approved by making a phone call, where they either got a pending decision or even were denied initially and made that call. We may have some reporting bias where the people that don't succeed don't necessarily tell us always about that, but we see a very, very high percentage, and it makes sense. I think that the automated systems are designed to approve only the best people. For the most part, if you get a pending decision, you may get eventually approved anyways, but calling improves your chances tremendously.
Another thing about calling as well is there's instances where for some reason there's something about your profile and there's something about your information that raised a flag.
Yes.
We weird addresses that were zoned, and there's a bunch of weird stuff that can get you caught up in that.
I've had it be as simple as my credit report showed my mom's old address instead of my address, and that was oh, you live in Texas now. Okay, no problem, you're approved. Really, that's it. So anyways, David had a similar situation. He had reached out about, I believe this was the Barclays Aviator Red Card, which as of the moment of recording this is still offering 60,000 points after your first purchase. Buy a Snickers bar, get a free flight to Europe or lots of other places. So needless to say, David was bummed that he didn't get initially approved. I called the reconsideration line. I was greeted by a warm and friendly operator. I was courteous towards him and provided him with all the information he requested. He asked me about the date of my application, which I told him was the 15th. I explained that I was getting married in September. Congrats, by the way, David. And had several purchases to make that I would be, making in the next couple of months. And I mentioned that I fly often with American Airlines and that I wanted a card that would allow me to maximize on my travel. Also let him know that I wasn't particularly happy with Amex and Chase and that I was looking to move my business over to Barclay. The operator absolutely loved hearing that. From there, he put me on a brief hold, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. When he returned, he commended me for my excellent credit score and excellent payment history and approved my application on the spot. It was extremely painless.
Man, David, I got to say, if I was down the road teaching a points and miles course at University of Texas, you got a 4-point, my man. There's nothing else you could have done
Flawless
better, man.
Execution.
Oh, man,
so, just a couple of things to point out. So, number one, and I'm glad that David mentioned this because just being nice, like remembering that you're talking to a real person and potentially, I don't know what it's like being a reconsideration person, but a lot of times people get denied and they call, I would imagine, someone upset, so you got to be friendly. That's part one. Also, like a couple of key things that David hit that are important. Having the information, the date of your application, that helps them find things, makes things easier. They may at times ask you things about, income, and you want to know what you put on the application. Right. That's one reason that it's a really good idea to call immediately after rather than waiting a few weeks where you might have forgotten certain things. So that was good. Having a reason that you're interested in getting a card, knowing either something about the benefits of the card or showing an affinity for the airline, whose points you're earning. Those are the types of things that the banks want to hear, that, they're marketing a card that's an American Airlines card.
When you call reconsideration, it's like you want to say pretty much the opposite of... So I listened to this niche podcast on maximizing all this stuff, and I figured I could get a nice redemption out of the sign-up bonus, and I don't even know if I'll keep the card open. So yeah, give them a legit reason. I think the airline card or playing that angle is pretty easy. Like, hey man, I fly this airline a lot, and I figured they were marketing it at me, and I figured I may as well start taking advantage of this stuff, You can really put the onus on them, like, hey man, you were marketing this to me, like I flew you, I fly you, I'm loyal.
Yeah. I think one other thing that he did really well is, referencing purchases that are coming down. If you have big upcoming expenses, so in David's case, he's getting married, that always involves some purchases that you're going to have to make. And so talking with them about that, and in particular, if you are already, the bank obviously knows what's on your credit reports. So they see you have relationships with other banks. And so if that's true and you do already have a Chase card or an Amex card, that can be something that can help as well to say, that you're essentially interested in moving the existing purchase volume from one bank to the new bank that you're trying to open
on a super
card.
Simple level, the way the bank sees that is like a tiny little market share grab where this person's got to do some spending. Previously, they're doing it with Amex, and we got a chance to have them do it with us, and we're going to get our tiny little piece of the pie every damn time he uses a card. Yep.
And so that's a big win. And it's also a subtle way of saying, I'm not planning on taking your card and going to buy a bunch of new stuff that I wasn't buying already. Right. I'm just taking Chase's lunch and giving it to you. And, so you don't have to be super explicit about saying it that way, but that's the message is like, I'm not super happy with card X from Capital One. I'd like your card instead. And I'll just start buying my stuff with it. Yeah. With this one, if you're so kind to approve me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyways, David, thank you very much. I really appreciated the write-up and just sort of the storyline of how the call went. Super helpful. Hopefully some of you folks got some out of this as well. and would love to hear success. And also, please, failure stories if you have any about reconsideration. There are situations where you're going to just need to wait for a little bit of time, or you may need to take some actions to improve your credit score. So if you have any stories about interactions with the bank like that, we would love to dive into them on a future episode. All right, so I think that's going to do it for this week's show. Do you got anything else?
Man, the only thing I would like to add very quick, because this is something we've talked about a lot, the Brazilian visa for American citizens. You can do it online, 4 to 5 business days instead of $160. It is only like $40-some. We'll have a link in the show notes on anybody itching to go to Brazil. Caveat there is they're pretty loose on business days. So if there is a Canadian, Japanese, Brazilian, or American holiday, that is not a business day. But nonetheless, man, this is a massive improvement. 25% of the cost, 4 times faster, like rock and roll, man. This is
great news. All right, well, we'll save. We got a few other rundown articles we can kick to next week. Nothing time sensitive. I do want to talk about the American Airlines thing next week. That's too funny.
Yeah, shit.
All right, so that's going to do it. Show notes will be at abroaders.com/204. And if you do have a question, comment, or story to contribute, we've got an Ask Us Anything. It's right at the top of the show notes. So just click that link, and there's a little question form for you to fill out. And we appreciate your feedback, and thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next Thursday.
Hey, Broaders, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Eric or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.